Welcome to Bridges Live, and here we have You Be the Judge, and this comes on every Wednesday at 6 p.m. If you can hear my granddaughter in the background, that's because she's here visiting, so that's great. So she's going to be live on air. But more important thing that we like to do on You Be the Judge is to talk about a lot of the things that most people don't hear and go into the legal issues and go into the emotional issues, but go into issues that we can talk about. We I'm the host, Dr. Paul. We also have Marilyn Pierre, attorney at law, who's running for circuit court judge in Montgomery County. Everybody give a cheer. Yay! Yay. And then we have our other co-host, Judge Claudia Barber. And she is not here with us yet, but hopefully she'll be on her way. But then we have a special guest called Kristen Mink. And Marilyn Pierre is going to introduce her. So go ahead, Marilyn, please.
Well, Dr. Dyer, thank you very much for that nice introduction. And Kristen, we're just so happy. Well, should I say Miss May? We're so happy to have you as our special guest today. And I would like to give you a brief introduction. But Kristen May is a lifelong Silver Spring resident, a former MCPS, that's Montgomery County Public School teacher, and a community organizer with the Center for Popular Democracy. She's also the daughter of a Chinese immigrant who is running to be the first Asian American ever seated on the Montgomery County Council. Woo! So we applaud you for trying to be the first, and shame on us for that happening sooner. You might recognize Kristen Mick as you might recognize Kristen from a 2018 video in which she confronted Trump's corrupt director of the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt. She confronted him in a local restaurant. With her child on her hip, she told Scott Pruitt to resign for his misuse of tax dollars and failure to address climate change. That video went viral, and 3 days later, Scott Pruitt resigned. Wow. Kristen has always spoken truth to power, and now she's running a grassroots campaign to get a seat at the table in Montgomery County. Please welcome Kristen Mick. Yay!
Yay! Thank you so much for having me, and you can absolutely call me Kristen.
You could call me.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Big fan of You Be the Judge and you, and I'm very happy to be with you here today. As you mentioned, I'm running for Montgomery County Council. I was born and raised here in Silver Spring. My mom is a Chinese immigrant. She moved here. My dad is from, farm country, Montana. And they moved here to Montgomery County, to raise their family. And I can't imagine being anywhere else. I attended Montgomery County Public Schools. I taught in Montgomery County Public Schools. I have two kids, and the older of them, the 5-year-old, will be entering kindergarten this fall. We are very excited for her. The teachers I know have had such a rough year over this last year. I'm so grateful to them and so excited for my kid to be in their care. So a little bit about myself. As you mentioned, I now work for the Center for Popular Democracy. So while I was teaching, I taught for many years. And during that time, social justice has always been very important to me. And so, we work that into the classroom in a lot of ways. It was always very important to me to make sure that students were learning how to be critical thinkers. And I also did a lot of volunteering and volunteer organizing, attending marches and protests, going to, as an individual citizen, going to talk to my representatives at every level, making those calls, placing those emails, and then eventually helping to organize those things. That really took off after the confrontation with Scott Pruitt in the restaurant, when I suddenly got this 15 minutes of fame, where I was just going from MSNBC to CNN and, place to place to place. And of course, my thought was, how do I use this moment to platform the groups that had really put in the labor to get us to that moment where he was so vulnerable at that time? How do I make sure that I'm platforming them and helping to make sure that their names are getting out there, and that more people are following their work and supporting their work? And so that brought me into close contact with a lot of different organizing groups. And I started speaking at rallies and things like that. And then that kind of became, that turned into an offer from the Center for Popular Democracy to actually come work with them. So now I help to, my full-time job is helping to organize those protests, helping to get people in the streets, helping to arrange, take care of folks who are doing civil disobedience, helping to bring impacted people to the offices and to the doorsteps of the people in power so that they can tell their stories, because those stories are so influential. And at some point you're doing all of these things and you are protesting in the streets with all these folks and you're like, gosh, this would be so much easier if we could just have, those seats at the table, So people have been asking me for several years now, when am I going to run for office? And I have been saying, no. But again, the more you look up and down those lines of protesters and so on, the more it makes sense to just go after those seats. So now at this particular moment, we're at such an intersection of crises here in this moment with COVID and, how difficult that has been for people in terms of housing, jobs, and small businesses. We now potentially have thousands more people saddled with new pre-existing conditions. So healthcare has always been important. I think that the importance of that is going to continue to rise. And then, of course, we've been seeing the Black Lives Matter movement, and we've been seeing people in the streets, including right here in Montgomery County, who are demanding change and demanding justice and demanding a reimagining of public safety. And then, of course, climate change. I mean, it is so evident. We're all feeling this heat wave, and we're seeing in the news how much it's impacting individuals. We have climate refugees who are coming in. We have bridges that are falling apart. So climate justice, we are really at a turning point, and we're starting to really go over the line. We need every piece of legislation to be.
This meeting is being recorded.
So with this intersection of crises and with public awareness of these issues, has never been higher. It is such an opportunity for us to really elect people into power who are looking to be bold and make those changes and make systemic change, and people who are political outsiders, because folks are really paying attention. They're looking for change. They're looking for people who are willing to go bold. So that's why I thought, this is the moment when we could seize a progressive majority here in Montgomery County.
So Kristen, you're riding a lot of horses. There's trust me, when you become an activist, you start latching on the horses, you're bringing ponies, your carriage is getting bigger. I mean, there's tons of stuff rolling down this road. And ultimately, when we talk about activism, we're not talking about our activation. We're talking about getting people to activate, right? And that seems to be our struggle, no matter who, what, and where we are. In our struggle, it's not the struggle to right the wrongs. That's easy. It really is. It's easy to right the wrongs. But the only way to get something right is to get people activated, and they're not activating. So how do you see that to change, especially teaching in Montgomery schools like you have, working with kids? How do we activate?
I actually disagree. I think they're activated. I think we can always do more, but I think now is a moment when people are activated and energized. People who weren't activated 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, they are activated now, and I'm seeing it just in the conversations that I'm having with family and friends and neighbors when I'm out in the streets, in the organizing that I'm doing. We're always bringing people out into the streets, and I'm seeing new faces, people who are out marching for the first time. It's an exciting moment because of all the potential. There are a lot of really bad things going on right now that frankly have been going on for quite some time. We're seeing a lot of them come to a head in a lot of ways, but let's not get it twisted. Like, this stuff is not brand new,
right,
just because people are suddenly getting activated. But the point is, people are activated. Let's harness that. And that's why this is such an exciting moment here in Montgomery County, because, we call ourselves a liberal county, and in a lot of ways we are, but what we need is all of those people to come out and vote. We need everybody coming out to vote so that our county council members and everybody else on the full slate, local, to state level is really representative of where we are as a county. And I don't think that that's the case right now, but I do think that we can get there at the next election. I think now is the moment.
I think that's a very good answer. And on You Be the Judge, we really try to educate people, and we believe that education is power. So we try to encourage people to become more educated and to empower them with information. And I'm saying that because a lot of people might not know exactly how the Montgomery County Council works. Just quickly, the Montgomery Council has 4 at-large candidates for the county. Right now, there are 5 district candidates. And it's likely that because of the census, there might be 2 more. So there might actually be an 11-member council by the time
this is all over.
But by the time the deadline is to run for something for the council. But you're not concerned about that because you're running at large, and that means the whole county can vote for you.
That's right. Yeah, we have a 9-seat council. It's going to be 11 seats, but we don't know exactly where they're going to go, and we don't know how the borders of the other districts are going to shift, and whether there might be incumbents who decide that once they see how the district lines shift, that they might end up in another district. They might decide to run for something else, county executive or what have you. So this race could be very interesting.
And the county council is the legislative branch of our county. So we have the county executive, that's the executive branch. That's, I guess the equivalent would be the president. The president of the country is the county council, is the equivalent of the county council of the county. Then you have the county council, that's the legislative branch, which is the equivalent of Congress. Then you have the judicial branch is state, so we're not even going to discuss that. So as a potential legislature, tell us your platform and tell us what it is that you would like to see happening in Montgomery County.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, fundamentally, I'm really excited to bring all of the voices of the people who I work with now, which is impacted people who are in the community, advocates who are community leaders. They're who I work with every day, and I'm excited to be a direct voice for them at the table because nobody knows better what is going to solve the problems of the community than members of the community who are the most impacted. So having those voices brought directly to the table is really what I want to do. They should not need to be out in the streets shouting for what they want. Those should be the voices of wisdom that we have helping to shape policy. Reimagining public safety is really important to me. There is a lot that we can do that I think everybody could agree on once folks really understand what it means. And we're seeing examples in other cities and counties across the country of, delegating certain tasks that are currently, we ask our police officers to do everything. It's a one size fits all. You call 911, right? Like cops respond to everything. We should have an emergency response force that can differentiate between a mental health crisis and a broken tail light and a kindergartner who wandered away from the classroom and an ongoing violent crime. The idea that we're sending the same type of officer armed with guns and the same type of training to all of those different scenarios does not make a lot of logical sense when you step back and think about it. And there are plenty of other places who see that, and there is more differentiation in their crisis response. So that is one thing that I think that we need to address as a community. And we've started to on the county level. We do have some mobile crisis units that are comprised of a mental health worker and a medic who can respond. But right now they respond along with a police officer. So you lose a lot of benefits with that because it does help to de-escalate people when you have a response that doesn't include a uniformed officer. And it's also, it's a resource. You're using resources to get that police officer there. And if it's just a mental health crisis and there's no physical danger, right, you don't need that police officer there. So just in terms of thinking of funding, it's a huge money saver to be delegating quite a number of tasks where you don't really need an armed officer for any reason to other people who can help to, for example, if you have somebody who's having a housing issue, who can help them find housing for that night and help them get in with a program that's going to help them find stable housing moving forward. And so our police officers are trained to respond to situations as opposed to preventing situations. There's a lot that we can do preventatively too. So once with our cost savings, we can also fund and increase funding for programs that help reduce calls to the police, like housing and mental health initiatives and that sort of thing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you. But so you already asked somebody to quit and that they should have resigned, right? And how you got about that in your 15 minutes of fame. There's people on the council that shouldn't be there anymore. Have you voiced your opinion about how they have been and how they could have been? Have you spoken about that?
So for me in this race, I want people to be voting for me,
not against
somebody else,
right.
So to that end, I think that we will get the best results legislatively and that we will be most representative of the county if we're able to bring more progressive people onto the county council. And so I think voters will agree with that. And I know people who are also those people, and so part of what we're doing in educating voters so they know what they're informed and they should vote for who they feel best.
Well, somebody has agreed with you, if you could look in the chat. And we talked about there being 4 at-large county council members and 5 and possibly 7 by the time by the time the dust settles, district county council members. And you talk about how we need more progressive ones. Do you know how a person would judge who's progressive, who's not? That way they could give you some help on the council when you get there, as opposed to voting for you and then voting for somebody else who might be fighting against the policies that you would champion?
Yeah, I mean, we have folks voting records. We also know in terms of who's on the council, and we also know, we can look around and see who shows up to things and what they show up to and what they don't show up to. And you can look through their, public statements on their social media and in the interviews that they do. What are the things that they care about? What are they investing their time in? A lot of them, they speak pretty clearly, and we've got some fairly strong members of the county council now, and we have some who are not really speaking up on a lot of things that we're talking about today. So I think, as we get closer to the primary date, which is next year, we're going to want to make sure that voters are very clear on where the different candidates, incumbents and non-incumbents, fall on each of these issues. And that's what's going to allow constituents to really make informed choices. But I do think that will certainly coalesce as we move closer to the date of the primary. We're going to really want to make sure that it's very clear that folks understand where everybody stands. Right now though, my job, I feel like, is just, I want to make sure folks, I'm new to the table. I'm new to a lot of folks, and I want to make sure folks know where I stand.
So let's keep talking about where you stand and what's like when you get to the council, because we're going to make sure you get there. So when you get there, do you have your first one thing you want to do that says this has got to be done now, and the rest of the stuff do you almost have like a checklist?
So I think that there's a lot of things that are important to me, and we have to be able to do multiple things at the same time. And something that we have to remember is that every bill can incorporate a number of different priorities. For example, like climate justice should be a part of almost every bill we put through, like anything that has to do with infrastructure or development. If we're not taking climate justice and climate change into account, right, then we are funding future discarded pieces of infrastructure, for instance, and doing active damage. So a lot of these things really work together, and we have to keep in mind, racial justice and social justice. That needs to be a part of every piece of legislation. Every proposal needs to be examined with that lens. And, we need to be looking at, is there anything that we can do in here to make sure, in this particular bill, to make sure that we are helping to to further those causes. So there's multiple things that I want to be doing at the same time, even within individual bills. I do think, affordable housing is one that is huge right now, and it's going to be escalating over the coming year because we're seeing with the COVID crisis, a lot of people feel like the COVID crisis is kind of wrapping up right now, right? Montgomery County is over 70% vaccinated.
Right.
But, the mask regulations are being rolled back and so on. But, when you look at housing, those tolls are coming due, those moratoriums are being lifted and landlords are booting people like right now. And the courts are overwhelmed and the courts know that they're overwhelmed and that makes their job easier. I'm not saying every judge in every court, but this is a pattern. This is a pattern that we're seeing commonly across the country as well as in some places here. Where they know that people are not able, they can have these long lists of people who are potentially about to be evicted, and they know that they're not all going to show up. They know that they're not all going to have representation because the representation is being done so much by nonprofits and by advocacy groups, and we just don't have enough of them to make sure that they're getting to everyone. So these folks they're not showing up, they're not being represented, and it's just like eviction. This is a huge crisis. It's a crisis that is not just siloed in housing, right? This is a health crisis. This is going to be an education crisis. Like it's a food crisis. This impacts so many different things. Housing is so fundamental. And this is a crisis that we are just going to see explode in Montgomery County over the coming year. So that is something that is a very pressing concern.
But one of the things, I know we have a question by Tom, but one of the things that people don't realize that Montgomery County is very large, right? And there's a lot of people that are not worried about their food and their housing. So they care less about the people who are affected by it, and that's where most of the money in the influencer goes to them and not to the people who are so needed. So Tom, you have a question, please.
Yeah, the idea that when you're dealing with an obvious mental health crisis, someone who you get a 911 call and someone's acting in a way that just suggests to the person who screens these calls that you need someone with that kind of training. I'm wondering, when you reimagine public safety, do the police themselves welcome this kind of idea to have people who are not, violence workers, so to speak, but rather people who are trained to deal with mentally unstable people? Just as you have people who are especially trained to deal with hostage situations, to negotiate, et cetera. Do they really oppose this, or is this just something that everyone? It just seems so obvious to me that most people would agree to this.
That's a fantastic question, Tom. Thank you. So I'll give you an example. In Eugene, Oregon, they have a program called the Cahoots program, and that is a mobile emergency response system that is now being replicated in cities and counties across the country because it was so successful in Eugene. And it's actually called Cahoots. It's an acronym, but it's also kind of a joke because it's a community group that's working in cahoots with the police. So they communicate with each other. The police can call up Cahoots. Cahoots can call up the police as needed. If you look at the statistics, you actually see that the Cahoots calls in the police very infrequently. Then the police call in Cahoots more often. And the police there are really appreciative of having Cahoots because it means that they don't have to deal with, these situations that they're really not specially trained for and that are very difficult and very time consuming. And the benefit also of having these community groups who respond is that they don't criminalize, right? They don't arrest. What they do is they problem solve in a way that makes that person less likely to result in an emergency call, in a 911 call in the future. So you see the number of calls starts to decrease over time as well because they're actually solving fundamental problems. And that frees up the cops. Like, cops will never complain that they don't have enough to do, right? That frees up the cops to focus on things that might be more appropriate for them. So I do think that there is a feeling of, amongst police officers, especially in places where things like this haven't been enacted, of fear that, like, you know, give them an inch and they'll take it a mile. And it's that fear of change. But I think we need to be able to have a more nuanced conversation. Like, let's start off with the low-hanging fruit where everybody can agree that something that's just a mental health situation, it would be more appropriate to have mental health workers come there and not somebody with a gun. And we see the results of that, right? A kid walks away from school, like, we don't need armed police officers with their children. You know, that sort of thing. Traffic enforcement is another thing. When you're pulling somebody over for a broken taillight, that person doesn't need to have a gun, right? So we start with the low-hanging fruit, but I think it does need to be a conversation, and it does need to be the community. Like, and when I say conversation, I primarily mean a conversation with the community, because I think once everybody understands the potential for how we could really improve our emergency response systems, then more people will be on board, and then the police, no matter how nervous they are about change, they're going to have to come along.
Well, thank you for that. We've got a couple of questions for you. First, I saw Mithun, then I saw Will, and then I saw Liz. So can we go in that order? So Mithun, could you please ask your question?
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you, first of all, to the host. And thanks for Kristen Mink to come today and talk to us. Appreciate greatly for your time. Now, I am a voter, so your answer will determine my vote. So, and I am going to provide some comment. Yeah, no pressure, that's fine. But I'm just saying, I am a small landlord. We have a business. So I just want to make the comments because right now I have a tenant for 9 years who is accumulating junk stuff in the house and making the house very bad. Now we have 2 years, I'm telling the tenant that I'll be happy to help the tenant. I even got the adult services from Montgomery County to come and help the elderly person to help, but they don't want to take any help. And the lease is up. I given a 30 days notice to make the violation corrected in December of last year. And they didn't correct that. And now the lease is up. I'm not going to renew the lease. And we have filed for tenant holding over in District Court of Maryland, Montgomery County. And now we came to know that they are processing the cases from November. So this is June, and they're processing the cases from November. Now, I'm totally understanding and compassion with the people who are tenants. And this pandemic is very problematic for everybody. But the problem, what is happening, we just got a Supreme Court order, the CDC moratorium is still stand because of 5-4 verdict I saw yesterday, which is very unfortunate. But we have to understand, we are just small landlord. We have our bills to pay. We have our mortgage to pay. So the tenant who don't pay their rent, it would have been a better option because if they don't apply for help, county is not going to come and help us. And the law has been made such a hopelessly way, that's my opinion, that only tenant can ask for help. The landlord cannot ask for help. Okay, it's totally discriminatory towards landlord. That's my opinion again. So we are totally thrown under the bus. Big corporation, they have a lot of money, they have lawyers, but we are just mom and pop, just 1 or 2 houses we have where we have a mortgage to pay and we have rental income to be depending on, and we can't even properly get some tenants. We are concerned and we are so much scared that they're going to get inside and they say they can stay there for a year for free. And now we still have to pay the mortgage because if we don't pay the mortgage, the bank going to come and take the property. But the tenants, they move out from the state, we cannot able to trace them. So why the county or the state make such rules that let there will be a commission or something where we can bring up those evidences that tenants are behind their rent, and without the tenants' active participation, that landlord can get those money that has already passed and as a law, number one. Number two, just cause. I think you must be knowing about just cause rule. They tried to pass that and it was turned down in the Maryland. Kumar Bharve's committee has turned it down. because I sent a legal justification why it is unconstitutional, because just cause the rule they were trying to pass, and the county executive has full support to that, which is unconstitutional to my opinion, because tenant can keep on renewing the rental lease. Landlord has no reason to stop that. So like, for example,
Mitchum,
Mitchum,
yeah.
could you please ask your question? Because we have other people waiting.
Sure. So do
to
you
ask
have,
their question.
sure, do you support the just cause bill? Number two, and number three is, I have been assaulted in my house, and I want the county executive to see the tape. It's been several months, county executive not giving me an appointment. Can you help me to get an appointment with the county executive to see the tape that I'm being assaulted in my own house? And Internal Affairs have already found those officers guilty, but they did only counseling for an assault. So that's my, I end it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitchum. Boy, I know that's a loaded question, Kristen. I know it's loaded. Answer what you can, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question, Mithun, and thank you for sharing your story. Hearing personal stories is so powerful and so important. And that's exactly like what my whole line of work actually is built on, and what I think that our legislation should be built on is on hearing those personal first-person stories. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share that. I think that we did not reach a perfect bill with the Just Cause bill. I think that we saw that, and I think that to your point, one of the pieces that has been missing in this during the pandemic in terms of housing is how we are dealing with the fact that we have landlords who are not getting money that they need to be able to maintain housing, and I'm talking especially about landlords who own only a small handful, of properties, maybe just one or two places. And they don't have a huge reserve of cash funds to carry them through the time. It's been a real issue with getting people, not only the fact that that we had to get folks enrolled, people had to go through a process to even apply to get, rent assistance, which is already a huge barrier. But then waiting for that rent assistance to come through, and in a lot of cases, there are people who are very behind on receiving rent assistance that they're supposed to have coming they're supposed to have coming their way. So that's an issue both for the renters and for landlords who don't have a huge reserve, and that is really a problem with with our government services, which is why. For example, I'm also very active in mutual aid, because mutual aid work is where we in the community are helping each other. And let me tell you, the aid flows quickly there. Somebody needs food, somebody needs diapers, and you post about it in your mutual aid group, or you put the word out in your mutual aid circles, and that's going to be there because we know people can't wait. We know it has to be made easy, and we do need our government to function more like that, with an understanding that people can't wait. And we do need to also have voices like yours at the table, because folks need to remember that we can't just demonize landlords when there are landlords who don't have, who aren't coming into it as millionaires, that don't have tons and tons of properties, and they need to be able to pay their mortgage. So we need more mortgage assistance. Folks it needs to be easier to get people enrolled in rental assistance. I know of some landlords, who are going door to door with a laptop or with an iPad, trying to get people signed up to get their rent assistance. And it should not be that difficult. So I appreciate you sharing your story. I wish I had a better answer for you right now, but I think honestly that there have been failures on multiple levels here. And in terms of getting a meeting with the county executive, I don't have any more of a foot in the door there than you do, but I am happy to to send some emails and make some calls on your behalf to try to make that happen, because I do think that stories like yours should be heard.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Thank you, Mithun. I see that Judge Barber has joined us. Welcome, Judge Barber. Will had a question, so Will, you go next, and then Liz could go after you. Will, I think you've muted. Can you unmute yourself?
There you go.
Okay,
Will.
I have the opposite question, which is someone who gets behind in his rent, and is ultimately ejected, uh, unless there was a friend or a family, all of his earthly belongings, other than what he can carry on his back, are gone. Now, psychologically, that's not a good thing. And the question is, what programs does the county have? I obviously don't know the answer. What programs does the county have to store the goods of people who suddenly find themselves without a house? And should there be more such service?
That is also an excellent question. Thank you so much. That is a question that is on top of mind for a lot of people, and I'm glad that it's being brought to the forefront at this time. I was actually on a call last night. There was a hearing folks were testifying to the county council about a plan called Thrive Montgomery 2050, which is just kind of a general plan looking at how we want to develop Montgomery County over the next few decades. And one of the comments on there that really stuck with me was a woman who was talking about how we need to set up a more humane system of eviction. And that stuck with me for two reasons. First of all, because my instinct is like, we need to be able to find a solution where people are not being evicted, like we need to be making sure that rental assistance is there as you need it. We need to have social services who are able to step in when there are mental health issues, right? There need to be people who not just tenants can call, but landlords can call if they see that their tenants need help, to Mithune's point, right? So by the time somebody is getting evicted, that's a failure, a policy failure on just so many levels. But the reality is that those evictions are happening, and they're happening in a way that's very traumatizing to those tenants. And there are often children there, and it's just really awful. I don't know of a program. I don't know of an existing program that we have now, and so we do see folks who are losing a lot of their belongings. As I mentioned I do a lot of mutual aid work, and I became friends with a woman who was very pregnant, and it was a really difficult pregnancy, and they were, they had the family, there were some employment issues and so on, but she's a wonderful woman, like any workplace would be very lucky to have her. But at the time, they were in this housing, and she was very pregnant, and I was working with some other folks in mutual aid to collect what she would need to be able to welcome this baby into the home. So we were getting together all of these, like what you would provide at a baby shower. And so we had a list, and people were buying them off the list and mailing them to her apartment. And I got a call from her, and in the time between when this list went out and folks started, fulfilling all of the needs and having those things shipped over there, and before they arrived, she called me and she said, "I'm being evicted, like right now." And this was early on, just before the pandemic, actually, and or right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so and so I'm rushing around trying to figure out how we can prevent her from being evicted. But they're in her house, and she had kids there. She's very pregnant. She was supposed to be on bed rest. It just was really a nightmare. And so by the time I got there, she had been locked out. And it took some doing to, we fundraised to get her, the family, into a motel for the night. And then it was all this extra efforts to try to find them a spot in a shelter. And she's actually still trying to get keys to her own place, even though she's been approved for affordable housing. So, during that time, then all of these goods were being shipped to her apartment. And so, her sister and I and a couple other people were taking turns trying to stop by and grab the packages as they were delivered, because folks would see these packages delivered to what was clearly a closed apartment, and other folks were picking stuff up too, and it's like strollers and bassinets and diapers and all of this stuff. And there was just nothing that we could do to stop the process. It was like a steamroller. So I think that it's a really important question. And while I would like to say, like, let's fix the problems so that folks aren't being evicted, realistically, we do need solutions that prevent these truly inhumane and traumatizing experiences from happening.
All right, so
I want to suggest something, give you a pointer. You can do forwarding address to the previous address to the new, so you don't have to keep going. And then UPS, FedEx and all, once you go online and you update that so that they can get the updated address, just to give you a pointer. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Thank you so much. And yes, we did do that, but it wasn't able to, because those things were being delivered like that day and the next day, we weren't able to do them. And we were able to get a few things moved, but there was so much stuff arriving there so quickly that they said they actually weren't able to forward it in time. So it was, and plus it was through a registry. So they also said like we couldn't stop any of those goods because other people had purchased them, and it was just a whole ordeal. But to the larger point, you know, we need measures in place. And small children and families just suddenly being put out on the street like that.
my thought is that some of the landlord-tenant laws that are already in place have a portion of a humane aspect to them. For example, you can't evict somebody just because they're late one time. It has to be 3 times that the landlord goes to court. And after the 3rd time, only after the 3rd time would that landlord be eligible to evict somebody. Secondly, if the lease has run out, you can give a tenant 60 days notice, and that person has to move. Once the lease has terminated and you have decided that you will not renew the lease. So there are some aspects where policy considerations have taken place so that people are just not automatically at the snap of a finger, of a snap of a late payment, they're out in the street with and homeless. Then, you know, with the pandemic, I do realize there were moratoriums placed, and that imposed an enormous burden for small landlords. And so, you know, I'm thinking that the Supreme Court, of course, came down with a decision to keep the moratorium in place until it expires within the next 30 or 60 days. I believe it's supposed to expire in either July or August, the federal moratorium on evictions. So I do understand that there are situations where small landlords in particular are struggling. And, you know, we probably could do better in terms of having humane evictions. I definitely agree with that.
Well, thank you for that. Liz has been really patient. And Liz has a question, and then Comfort has a question. Go ahead, Liz.
Thank you. Hopefully I can remember my question, but Chris, it's very nice to hear from you. And this is going back to your earlier comment or your early idea about having not just the police with the guns in the holsters responding to every type of 911 call, but having the appropriate response team depending on what the issue is, which I think is a great idea. The thought, this is my question, is wouldn't that require somebody who's answering the phone at 911, who's able to figure out what, you know, what respondent to send to the particular call? Because that seems to be more of a challenge than having the team, the diverse team of responders being on as part of the county government, or the 911 folks, the emergency squad. So that's, I don't know if you thought about that, but that's something I would.
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you so much for asking it. And here's why I'm so excited about that question, is because it takes as a premise, right, that there's a better way. And it's just a question of like, logistically, how do we make sure that it's functional, right? We need to make sure that it works. So if we can see like, it would be ideal if we could have, different types of folks who are responding to different types of situations, right? If we can like agree on that, and then we say, how do we make sure that the system is working properly? Like that is a problem that we can solve, So yes, we do have some examples in other cities like Eugene, Oregon, and there actually are now multiple examples across the country where we have 911 operators who will redirect to one or two different response teams depending on what the crisis is. And it's questions like, are there weapons present, right? Is it a situation that involves like physical violence? Are folks afraid? That type of thing. Is it just like an unhoused person and it's so hot out that somebody is concerned, right? Because it's so hot or it's so cold or whatever, right? So if it's, there are those basic questions that the operators will ask to determine, for example, if they need to send an ambulance at the same time as the police, right? And so it's a similar thing where, they have certain questions that they ask, and, and the 911 operators are like trained for this moment, right? And they are, they're given the different criteria, and they get pretty practiced at analyzing what's unfolding on the other end of the phone. So it would just be kind of adding another layer there. They're already kind of making decisions about, do we need a fire truck? Do we need an ambulance? And it adds a little bit more of a layer. But, if the question is like, is this a moment where where there's potential for violence unfolding? That's something where we've seen in other cities that they've been able to answer that question with pretty high levels of success, and looking at success as how often are those crisis units, the mental health crisis units, for example, and the medics, how often are they then calling in and saying, actually, we need police backup? And what we're seeing is that happens very, very infrequently.
The one thing we realize is that the voters and people don't have enough information. They are not taught enough. And I don't know where people are going to get these education pieces outside of this show or any other show that we do, is because they have questions, but they don't know where to go to. They have stuff that's going on and they don't know who to contact. And that's why all these grassroots are doing as much as what they can, but they can't touch everyone, because we need the people to say, I need help. But they don't know, once they raise their hand, they have nowhere to go. There's like no form for them to be like, I don't know of anyone that happens to this, or I don't know where to go. And so they call these services and they get so rudely treated and looked down upon and discarded because of the people that are calling. They could be, the language could be an issue. There could be, the culture could be an issue. There's all these issues that people are calling, and yet they're just getting discarded. And I think that's where our problem lies in our communities. Montgomery County, all these counties across the United States, we are being discarded because of lack of empathy and compassion.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Dyer. We have comfort with her question. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, how you all doing?
We're doing
my,
well.
my question to the panel or to Christine is that how do you address this issue of the pandemic of police killing our children? Because I was a victim. My 26-year-old son was murdered almost 11 years ago, senior at Bowie State University. I mean, he went to city placement. You can go on my website, justiceforemmanuel.com. And because of lack of transparency and lack of accountability, the police officer, just get away with murder. I never thought that would happen to me. We came here and we worked very hard to have a better life for our children and our family. And, I don't know anyone that stands in the street corner selling drugs. And, when this happened to me, the emotional roller coaster that we mothers have to go through, and it's still going on, that police just kill brown and black skin for no apparent reasons. It could be due to the police are scared of our children, or the children are scared of the police. Our children, in short, our children are just dying in the hands of the police officers that are supposed to help them. Because this is very serious, especially in Montgomery County.
Well, I can partially speak on behalf of the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. I serve as chair of the Legal Redress Committee, and I have really seen horror stories of police brutality. From my evaluation of those cases and similar cases, I can tell you that there is an inherent policing problem, and it's all about how police police certain neighborhoods. And it's also all about the disparity in treatment of how they police neighborhoods, and how they generally police Black and brown people. The NAACP, our chapter at least, was also part of the press conference about the Ocean City incident that happened about a week or two ago. And I would encourage you to consider law firms that really focus on police brutality, like former Judge Billy Murphy's law firm in Baltimore, to consider evaluating your case and seeing if more can be done, because oftentimes you do feel hopeless. And under the prior system, I know that our NAACP focused hard on getting legislators to pass police reform legislation during this last General Assembly. And there are modest changes, but I know there are legislators that want to go back and do more, because body cameras are necessary. Some jurisdictions already have them, some don't. So that's a huge problem, because we find that there are many deficiencies in the internal affairs divisions of many police departments. That's why the police reform legislation became a center of attention during this past General Assembly. So I really pray for you that you will continue to find truth, and that hopefully you might be able to find some justice in your son's death.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story as well. And thank you, Judge Barber, for those insights. And I'm so sorry for your loss, Comfort, of Emmanuel. This is a really important issue to me. There's a lot of legislation that can be passed around, that's been looked at around like how to make sure police are held accountable, which so far is not a thing that is happening, generally speaking, as a trend. Cameras can sometimes help, but we have not really seen that they're that much of a deterrent, frankly. We've seen plenty of horrible things caught on camera and then folks walk free. Anton's law was just passed at the state level, which allows for some more transparency in terms of being able to see records around these cases. And all of these things are important, and they're pieces that we want to have in place, because these things are still happening. But I would like us to do better at getting to eliminating the problem in the first place, as opposed to seeking jail sentences after. That's not going to bring Emmanuel back. That's not going to bring any of these kids back. So, that's why reimagining public safety is so key here. That means fundamentally thinking about what is going to keep us safe. And when I say us, I mean Black and brown people first. I mean the people who are most impacted by the system of what's supposed to be public safety right now. We need to be centering those folks and centering, their experience and their community-based solutions as we look at how we could best reimagine public safety. And I think that what we really want to do is minimize contact between police and those communities. And that does not mean there are communities that are Black and brown communities who say, like, don't take our police away, like, we need them, we've got crime is happening, we need to be able to call somebody, right? And so the idea is not to pull the rug out from folks. However, we can minimize contact with the police by having alternative systems of response that do not fall under the purview of our current police departments, right? What we have seen is that, like, policing was founded in slave catching, and we have seen that we cannot get away from that kind of underlying it's an underlying part of the system. And so what we see is that when, a lot of times we get into like, oh, but I have friends who are police and there's good people and people get into change the system. And like, okay, all of those things can be true, but it's not really about individual police officers. Like we've seen, when individual police officers try to speak out, we see them move to desk jobs. We see them kicked off the force. The problem is not individual officers. The problem that we need to address is that, like, we have not been able to successfully fix the system as a whole, and it's gone on long enough. Like, it's not a good system. That much is clear. How many chances are we going to give it? We can do better. And it's not even that complicated. Like, common sense tells us that we don't need an armed police officer showing up because a kindergartner walked away from class, or because somebody's having a mental health breakdown, or because somebody is unhoused and it's very cold outside. Like, it's not hard to see that we could do better. We could come up with a better system. And so if we have different people who would only about 10% of calls to our 911 in Henry County are related to violence, and that includes violence against property. So that's actually a very small proportion of crime. So ultimately, when we have these other people who are responding, we have other people, we've got mental health workers, and social workers flooding the streets, right? We minimize those encounters with the police officers. And I think that fundamentally is going to be how we are able to start to get to the epidemic of Black and brown people being harmed and being killed by police officers. And again, it's not just like the murders, the deaths, those get media attention. But the person who's pulled over repeatedly going to work, like, that's a trauma too. The person who is pulled over, every day on their drive into their college class, that is a trauma too. All of this needs to be addressed. This should not be something that should be happening as part of what we want to call public safety, and we can do better. There are models that are already in place. And Montgomery County, we should be a liberal county, right? We can also be putting those things in place to serve as a model for other cities and counties as well.
As we're about ready to close up, and I know, Will, you have a question, and it looks like, Kristen, you're going to have to come back. Shame on you. You're just going to come back to talk more about this stuff, and that's heartbreaking for us. I'm trying to be funny, and but before we take off, I want to give our hosts any last questions or comments before we take off. And then we want to hear how we get in contact with you, Christian. How can people reach you and ask you direct questions and phone numbers, and how we get that? Judge Claudia, Barber, anything?
I don't have anything, because I want to defer to Christy, our special guest. We thank her for coming on board and sharing.
Marilyn? You're on mute, Marilyn.
Sorry, there were some noises around. You know how that is. Kristen, thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure having you. I want to remind everybody that in Montgomery County, you are actually voting for 5 members of the county council. You have the 4 at-large members who are running countywide, and then you have 1 district member that you vote for. So And if you have any questions about anything, please let us know. Thank you, Kristen. Please come back again and we will give you the last word.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all. It was really wonderful getting to chat with you all and talk about these issues that are so important to all of us, and getting to hear the stories that were shared here today. I so appreciate it, and I look forward to coming back. If you would like to get in touch with me, I'm going to put my email address in the chat for folks who are actually physically on the Zoom with us today, but I'll say it out loud as well. It's Kristen, that's Kristin, at KristenMink.com, KristiNMink.com. And that just goes right to me, so we can set up a phone call or whatever you want to do. I'm happy to hop on the phone, absolutely. And you can also follow me on Twitter at KristenMink _. And to your point, before we go, and let me give my website, which is KristenMink.com, and there's a cool video there. There's other ways to get in touch. There's a contact form there at KristenMink.com. You can also donate if you want to support the campaign. We're working really hard to qualify for public matching, because we are not going to take any money from PACs, from corporations, from developers. None of that. This campaign is funded entirely by the people, powered entirely by the people, which means we need to meet that minimum for public matching. So if you can go throw $5 in at KristenMink.com, that counts as another person who's helping us to qualify. So that's a really powerful tool you can use to help support the campaign. But I want to tie it back to something that you said earlier, Marilyn, about educating the viewers and Dr. Dyer about how, everybody is not on this call, right? Everybody is not listening to these podcasts and these different places where they can learn. And so it is incumbent on all of us, everyone who is listening, like, you are the advocates, you are the ambassadors, you help to educate your neighbors. The real conversations, like, this is an important conversation, but the real conversations, the one that are going to make the difference, the one that will drive people to the polls, the ones that will raise the public awareness, those are the conversations that you all have around your kitchen table and with your neighbors and at your workplaces and on your workplace Zooms, as the case may be, where when people say, I heard this line, like, defund the police, that's so crazy. And you can say, like, let's slow down. That was a actually very effective phrase for getting a lot of mainstream attention. Like, we wouldn't be talking about it here now. It got mainstream attention in large part because it scared people so much. But, like, Black people have been being murdered by the police for centuries. Like, we're talking about changing the system of public safety, and it's because of that slogan. So, like, where credit is due, it was effective at getting people's attention. Now we need to have the conversations about, what reimagining public safety looks like. And, like, once we have different response teams and so on, like, the police are going to need less money because they got few people responding to other things, right? We've had the best of the best doing certain particular things for a while, probably, right? So defund the police doesn't mean pull the rug out of public safety. It means we're going to use money to build out our system of public safety. We're going to broaden our definition of it. And so being able to have that conversation, you all, that is in your hands. So I appreciate so much everyone who is listening today, that you took the time to be here with us, and thank you for being the ambassadors of all of these pieces of political education that you get from podcasts like this one.